FNCS Grand Final starts today, and we have a lot to talk about. We have 5 of the 50 teams that qualified on a getting disqualified. We have huge game-changing updates like the Chains of Hades being vaulted. Plus, I of course want to give my predictions for who I think is going to do well in Grand Finals. So, there's a lot to talk about. Let's jump into it. Let's kick off talking about the team disqualified. And yes, you heard that correctly in the intro. 5 teams have been disqualified. That's 10% of the teams that made Grand Finals. We have never, ever seen this before. So on NA, the teams disqualified are Fade and Zare, Dorito, Kobe, H-Cube and Vlex, and Lancers and Navi. Now, if you're a mathematician, you know that was 4, not 5 teams. It's because one of them, Chavi and Neko, have actually been undisqualified. So after getting disqualified, a lot of people are accusing Chavi of cheating. And I said in my most recent video, I wasn't really sure about that. I haven't seen anything. He's been streaming all of the tournaments leading up to it. There's a lot of people who think he's innocent. Turns out he is innocent, and he has now been undisqualified. So there's 4 teams. The 4 teams that should now be playing in Grand Finals instead, and again, this can change because it's really hard to figure out who makes it and who doesn't, is Cease and Jack, Braden and Zyre, and then Fatch and Walkers. I don't believe Shadow and Zukis are in anymore. They potentially still could be, and it's Fatch and Walkers who aren't in. It's really hard to know because when there's this many teams getting disqualified, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly who's in and out. But the fact that we have had this many disqualifications the week of Grand Finals is just mind-blowing. Next up, let's talk about the major changes again the week of Grand Finals. We have the Chains of Hades being vaulted from the game, and you probably think that I'm gonna say this is a massive deal because of clips like this, where people are just smacking the crap out of each other with 2 chains through the wall, dealing ridiculous damage, and there is seemingly no counterplay. And while this was extremely strong and a lot of people hated it, this actually isn't the main reason why I'm talking about it. The main reason is the fact that there is now no way to quickly fish the week of Grand Finals. So EMPs are now vaulted from competitive and the Chains of Hades. This was instrumental for so many teams that needed this to quickly fish their loot. Teams like Pink and Vico, who were favorites coming into this Grand Finals, are now gonna have to spend a lot longer on their rotate just manually fishing with fishing rods. It doesn't mean they can't get the loot anymore, but when you could just use the Chains of Hades and grab all of it almost instantly, it is a major nerf. Now, for teams that were planning on using these chains to get their refreshes in endgame, they are also getting a massive nerf. Now, some people are really happy about this. Again, it did feel a little bit cheesy going down to the Chains of Hades. They weren't my favorite item, but I feel like a change this big the week of Grands is pretty insane, and I know there's some teams out there who are going to struggle because of it. Last thing I want to talk about before I get into my predictions, this doesn't affect Grands, but it is going to affect Fortnite competitive going forward in a big way, in a good way. Fortnite have now made it possible to run customs on tournament playlists whenever you want. And if you don't get what I mean by that, when you're running scrims or you're running professional practice games, unfortunately, as it currently stands, you have to run it on pubs, which means you get pub loots, all the NPCs, all the stupid goofy things that are in public matches that aren't in tournaments. This is why some of the best scrims this season have been on Mix-Up Monday. All the pros wait until Mix-Up Monday runs, they run customs on that so they get tournament loot, but they get to only verse other pros so they can practice. Fortnite have now made it you can do this at any time, so hopefully practice is finally saved. There are some other issues that need to be ironed out with this new change, and also I do still think that this isn't going to be perfect, but it's a big step forward for practice, which has been really lacking the last couple of seasons. All right, time for predictions, and I'm going to lead off by saying I think this is the hardest Grand Finals to ever predict ever. And I'm not just saying that as a cop-out in case my prediction's wrong. I truly believe that. Between the fact that this format has been, in my opinion, a pretty terrible indicator of who's looking good coming into Grands. We've had 4 duo cash cups and then FNCS with no set lobbies until semifinals. Take a team like Cammy and Seti, for example, a phenomenal team who was almost everyone's favorite to do well. We don't really have that much to base that off. We only have 4 cash cups, and then they played 1 game of set lobbies and won it, which is obviously a great sign. They won the 1 game they needed to, but I can't name another season going into Grand Finals where I've known this little about the teams that are playing. Let's be honest, duo cash cup finals aren't going to play out really anything like a Grand Finals, and neither really are semifinals when it's a victory format. Teams are only playing for the win. So we're basically basing our predictions off just who we think is going to do well based on like previous seasons, or we like their strategy and they've been practicing. But you know me, I like to be more analytical than that. I usually like to back it up with a whole bunch of placements, but we can't really do that. So because of that, don't flame me. I'm going to give you my top 10 for EU and NA, but I'm not going to do it in order. I'm sorry, it is just too hard to do. I tried to do it on stream. It created a bunch of drama. I'm just going to give my top 10 out of order. If you want to go out and do your top 10 in order in the comments, I respect you for it. I'll subscribe to anyone who even gets close to getting it correct, because I think it's going to be a nightmare. But With that being said, let's jump into it and let's talk about why I think some of these teams are going to do well. First off, let's go with NA. Let's pick the big team, Clix and Epic Whale. I am confident this team is going to get a top 10. I will be honest, I don't think they're going to outplace their placements last season. They got 4th place in the last FNCS Grand Finals, and I do really think that was Clix's best chance ever to win a Grand Finals. Things went a little bit off in the finals. They played really, really well. A lot of people were disappointed, but I think this season, it's looking a little bit sketchier. Clix and Whale's surge strategy right now pretty much involves just either W-keying a team that drops around them at Lavish Lair or aggressively fighting for the bunkers, but quite often they get to the bunkers after teams have already gotten there and they've already based up in hard maps because Lavish Lair takes so long to loot. If this is the case, I feel like this is going to be a very, very sketchy surge strategy. There's going to be a lot of games where they potentially go down early, even though they are a phenomenally good 2v2 team. They'll get third-partied, the fight will drag out, and it's going to mess up the rest of their game. So even though I think they'll win a lot of those early game fights, any team that is relying on the bunkers for their loot path and have to get it almost every single game to do well, I don't think any team in that circumstance is going to do well this weekend. So Clix and Whale, I have them in top 10, but I don't think they are going to get a top 3. Now the next one, of course, Peterbot and Poyo. Pretty much everyone's picked to win FNCS in this Grand Finals. It is looking very, very good for them. They were going into Grand Finals originally quadruple con. There was going to be 4 teams dropping there. There is now only 2 because 2 of the 4 teams that were contesting them got disqualified. Chavi's team being one of them. Once Chavi got re-added, he is now actually going over towards the underworld. So Peterbot is back to only versing 1 single team, which I think is massive for this team. Not only that, if you've watched how the Grimgate fight goes out on EU, quite often it's teams that land outside rotating in, playing very aggressive and causing issues for teams like Mustache and Malabuka. Not only has NA proven that they just don't want to do that because they're scared of Peterbot and Poyo, there's really no team nearby that could really make that play if they wanted to. Visuals and Braids, maybe. Cooper and Kanata, maybe. But because Barker and Paz are taking so much loot on their big split, it's where Mongrel and Savage drop, there is no team dropping where Tripper and Feroxy drop on EU, which is that south side of Grim and pushing in, which I think is going to be an incredibly good sign for Peterbot and Poyo. I think the biggest risk for Peterbot and Poyo this weekend, and the only reason why they may not win Grand Finals, is a whole bunch of teams start switching their drop to Grimgate, or teams around them do start getting desperate, where their desperation to try to have good games, especially on day 2. Remember, there is a 1.5 times multiplier for points on day 2. These teams getting desperate will actually start to fight Peterbot and Poyo, and that will mess them up, especially if that desperation comes out on the second day and a team that was still doing well, maybe not as well, starts to pick up those 1.5 time multipliers and run away with it. They are still definitely a favorite to win it, but that's the only way I can see something going wrong. Next up, we have Cooper and Kanata, the Dig Boys. They are dropping at the Yacht. The Yacht sailed off into the sunset halfway through the season, and they still stuck to their drop spot in this area. They have been playing extremely consistent in Cash Cups and FNCS, so I am very, very confident this team gets a top 10. Depending on if they kind of start channeling that aggression towards Peterbot or how they play that area, they could actually do extremely well this weekend, potentially winning FNCS. Next up, a team in a similar situation as far as having ridiculous consistency this season, Reed and Ritual dropping over at the Railways. They are uncontested at the Railway, which has been an issue for their EU counterpart, Yanis and Flixie, who have been struggling a little bit to surge when they have this. Reed and Ritual have not been struggling with surge. They are the second most consistent team in FNCS this season, and they've placed top 5 in all 4 of the duo Cash Cups. Or I think one of them they came 6th. So very, very consistent. Again, Reed and Ritual have actually talked about how, like, Reed's joked about dropping Grimgate if they're not doing very well and contesting Peterbot and Poyo. He said in my stream he thinks he can actually beat them off spawn as well. So we could see Reed and Ritual throw a spanner in the works and drop on them day 2. I don't know. We'll see. That might be their backup plan if they're not doing as well as what they hope, but they've been doing very, very well out of that off spawn situation. Barker and Paz, I think my most underrated pick in the top 10. Almost no one outside of the core competitive audience is paying attention to how good this duo is. They are dropping that Mr. Savage Mongrel drop spot like I talked about, the Amazon Fulfillment Center. It's a bunch of space. It's extremely good loot, and they will also have the forecast tower very, very often, which is just a massive recipe for success. Of course, our FNCS reigning champions, Acorn and Cold. Now, I don't think this is going to be a season where they potentially top 3 or top 5. I know that's crazy when we're talking about Acorn and Cold, the FNCS champs, but I think because they've already qualified to LAN, they've been very comfortable this season. If you look at their placements, they have hardly been playing, and when they are, they have not been placing as highly as usual. They are triple contested at fencing. They won last season from that situation, but that was when there was a vault and a lot more loot. We have also heard that Yasir and Krizux, our Hispanic duo, dropping fencing fields, wants to play very aggressive at the drop spot, which could really mess things up both for Acorn and Cold and Muzz and Paper, which is why I don't have Muzz and Paper in my top 10. They are the FNCS champs. They could still pull it off. Now, another very underrated team for me, and people are very much questioning me on this one. At least they were when I talked about it on stream. Bryce and Bolts, they're dropping to the southeast section of where Reed and Ritual are at the railways. They're dropping on the Pink and Vico split, if you know. This is a team that is going to be potentially affected by this fishing change. It does take them a lot longer to get their loot. Bolts on 0 ping is a different breed. He was insane on NA West. The servers moved. He is now boot camping in NA Central. He is in Dallas. He is looking very, very good. I think Bryce is one of the most underrated players in NA, period. He did phenomenally well with Chubbs at Global Champs. They did split up, which again, I was very confused when I first saw it, but I think Bryce and Bolts are going under a lot of people's radar. Then we have Booger and Ages, obviously the World Cup champ, dropping Mount Olympus. He is contested, and I'm not really sure how this spawn fight's going to go. On EU, we've been seeing a lot of really big teams like Queasy and Thomas struggling out of a contested Mount Olympus, so I hope Booger and Ages can pull off something big. I think being contested at Mount Olympus, for me, rules them out of a top 5 or top 3, but I think a top 10 is very, very doable. They could still push for that top 5 or 3 if they fight really, really well off spawn, which I hope they do. And then last but not least, for my top 10 on NA, we have Sphinx and Threats. They are dropping Brawlers Battleground. They've been looking very, very good in Cash Cups and FNCS so far this season. Two very good players who've played with, again, very high profile teammates, but I don't think have ever got as much spotlight as they deserve. That is my top 10, not in order. Again, there are other teams missing that I think could do extremely well, and Pen and Pump being one of them. They are kind of locked into a quadruple contested underworld. If they weren't in such an annoying off-spawn situation, they would 100% be in my top 10. Mixon and Paco, I know the EU guys are going to be very angry. They only just qualified to grand finals by 1 single point, but that is when they were contested. They are now uncontested on their split, which could very, very easily put them in a top 10. I just haven't seen them play enough. I'm going to be honest, they haven't played any duo cash cups because they're region locked to EU, so we only have their FNCS placements to go off. So I've seen them play in basically 1 or 2 set lobbies, and the one they qualified, they came 25th when top 25 qualify. It just wasn't good enough for me to put them in a top 10, but I hope for the storyline they prove me wrong. All right, flipping over to EU, and I could be extremely wrong on this. I am not confident in my NA top 10, as I said, and I am even less confident in my EU top 10. I'm gonna lead with that. First up, Pink and Vico. I've talked about Bolt and Bryce, their counterpart, a lot. Pink and Vico came first in both the weeks of FNCS qualifiers. Again, they didn't finish in set lobbies, but I think this duo is looking extremely strong. Working with Blood X, they're locked and they've been playing together for a while now, and I really want to see both of them do well. Their drop spot's extremely strong. They know it very, very well. They were dropping there last season. They have a lot of experience. I think this team is going to get an easy top 10. I really hope a top 3 as well. Now, Tayson and Venno, the big names. Tayson has had a rough couple seasons by Tayson standards. Not doing terribly, but not doing as well as Tayson normally does. Now, they are dropping fencing, and they have been all season, locked into a pretty ugly spawn fight, usually with 3 or 4 teams dropping there. There's now only 2 teams dropping there, Tayson and Venno and Nikoff and Snazy, and they have been, it looks like they're splitting the drop spot. It looks like they're not going to be playing super aggressive. I don't know where they put this. Tayson and Venno could start W Kingdom, but at least KXR, the map maker, was told that it looks like they're going to be going east and west and walking away with their loot. If that is the case, Tayson and Venno have some of the best loot in the game. Only 2 teams fencing leaves them with phenomenal material, phenomenal mats, a mid-map spot where they'll get a guaranteed DMR to surge base up and play very, very consistent. This could be our Tayson and Venno FNCS win. Now, next up, Cammy and Seti. I talked about them earlier. We've only seen them play 1 set lobby in FNCS, and they won it. Their split is one that I don't really understand why it's so powerful, but Cammy and Seti clearly see that it is. If any team's been put kind of working on these secret strategies coming into grand finals, it's going to be Cammy and Seti. If anyone has cooked up something and they're going to pull it out in grand finals, it's going to be Cammy and Seti. I talked to Pink on the podcast I was running with Levin. We're talking about people's kind of predictions, and Pink specifically mentioned that Cammy and Seti are fundamentally looking perfect right now. They have polished their strategy. They are looking excellent coming into this, and he would know better than anyone. Now, Chap and Teeny, this is insane for me. I think Chap and Teeny could potentially get a top 3 or top 5 this FNCS. And the reason why I say that is crazy is not because they're placements. You probably don't disagree with me. It's the fact this is Chap's first ever grand finals. And no, this isn't Liquid Chap. This is a new Chap, and he's playing with Teeny, a controller player. Again, I mentioned that as a big deal because the controller player is still yet to ever win an EU FNCS Grand Final. So we have a brand new Grand Final player and a controller player, and I have them confidently in my top 10, potentially even a top 3. They are dropping the Amazon Fulfillment Center. They are the team that's been contesting Mongol and Savage all season. They also get the Forecast Tower almost every single game, because since all the teams are contested around them that go for Forecast, they're usually one of the first teams there. They are looking exceptional. I never thought I would ever put someone who's got their first ever Grand Finals in a top 10 situation on EU, but they are looking amazing. Next up, Tripern and Fedoxy. This is a team that really is kind of like, they're a moving part around Grim Gate. One of the Duo Cash Cup finals, they actually walked away with the Grim Medallion 4 out of 6 games, despite not even dropping Grim. They're still dropping on that southern border on the edge. They're kind of playing Saboteur, rotating in, causing a bunch of issues. And if you look at the Grim Gate situation, that plays very, very much into their hands. So I'm really excited to see how this duo does. If they can get the Grim Gate Medallion 4 out of the 12 games this weekend and play the rest of their games out, they are looking very, very strong. Next up, Malibuca Mustache. Again, they are dropping Grim Gate. They are only contested by one other team at this point, which I think is a very, very good sign for this duo. The reason why I don't have them locked in as a guaranteed top 3 or even a win like I have with Peterbot and Poyo is just because EU's not as scared of Malibuca Mustache as NA's scared of Peterbot and Poyo. Even though they're only contested by one team, like I said, Tripper and Feroxy already have an entire strategy around W keying their way into Grim Gate. Tripper and Feroxy have even been hamming it up on social media. They're contesting Malibuca Mustache. So while I think they'll do extremely well, because if you've looked at their history, this team doesn't even need to win on spawn as often as the team they're versing, but the games they make it off spawn from, they absolutely pop off. And if they can make it off spawn 5 or 6 games with the Grimgate Medallion and play well, I think they could easily get a top 10 with just those half games played. So I think they're going to do well. I don't think this is their season to go back-to-back FNCS wins, but we'll have to see. Then we have Kiro and Mappy. Now, Kiro and Kidoa were looking absolutely phenomenal last season. They ended up deciding to split up because Kiro didn't want to contest Grim Gate. Kiro ended up not doing as well this season. Kiro and Mappy now looking very, very phenomenal was obviously the right call. I think they are a confident top 10. Now, my underrated pick on EU is Haris and Skivvy. Now, this is a duo that if you followed any of the, Coach Boob, Levin, Coach Harry, the analyst, Reese Hub, they've been hyping this duo up a lot. They've got really good duo cash cup placements. I don't know too much about them. I'm being honest. I'm putting them in my top 10 based on the fact that I respect the opinions of other people who clearly know more about EU with these players than I do. I hope they do very well. Their placements have had them going really under the radar. Where they're dropping over near Underworld and Grim Gate gives them a really good opportunity to W key in, play spoiler, third party a lot of these fights and walk out with some really good loot. If they play that smart, if they play that well, they could really, really have a big performance. And in my 10th and final spot, Flixie and Yanis. Now, Flixie and Yanis are dropping uncontested Reckless Railways. As I said earlier when talking about Reed and Ritual though, this has actually caused them some surge issues in the past. So that's why I've got them towards the end of my top 10 right now. I don't know if they're going to 100% hold out that top 5. I think they are too good of a duo not to get top 10 with so much loot, but they have been looking a little bit shaky coming into this. Now, the big name I know I'm missing that I want to back up here, there's 2 of them. Queasy and Thomas HD, triple contested at Mount Olympus. It has been looking a bit shaky for them this season. I don't want the Coach Harry treatment where my man got absolutely flamed for calling them out and saying they weren't playing well. They are still a phenomenal team. If they weren't triple contested at Mount Olympus, I would easily have them in my top 10 or top 5. They are the runners-up. They've already qualified for the lands. This season doesn't matter as much for them. Hopefully, they've cooked up some strategies to make it off spawn consistently, because I would love to see this team in the end game. It's just been a shaky season for them. Now, second team I want to talk about, Rezon and Vidil. Now, I've heard that they're dropping up against Glubshi, and a lot of teams don't think they'll actually fight over this drop spot, but I'm even more scared that they won't fight. I don't understand how this drop works. There is no loot on this drop spot. Either they 50-50 each other, which, as you know, is never really good coming into a 12 out of 12 grand finals. Even if they do start to win that spawn fight, I feel like Glubshi's team will just pull off and drop to the south, or vice versa, drop to the north, which means they have to play out their game with like less than 10 chests, and then they still might have to fight the other team for it anyway. I don't like this split even when it's uncontested, and I absolutely hate it when it's contested. If Rezon and Vidil were dropping anywhere else on the map, even if they were contested, I would probably put them in my top 10, but right now I just do not like their off-spawn situation. That's my top 10 on both regions. If you think I'm wrong, if you want to flame me, hey, swing by my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Aussie Antics. I'll be watching grand finals all weekend, giving away cool prizes, doing bingo boards, predictions, V-Buck giveaways, having a bunch of fun. Swing by. It's going to be a good time. I very well might be completely wrong.